Let's start. Okay, so welcome everyone to the bio mid-year revision. Thanks for joining me here on a Wednesday night. Yep, okay, so let's start. What are we going to cover? Today we're going to cover Sec 4 topics. So coordination and response in human, homeostasis, plant reproduction, and human reproduction. But the disclaimer is don't expect me to go through like every single content with you and explain to you what's happening. I'm going to go really big picture. Whatever I will be saying, it should be something that you already know. You will, if you know the content, it is more like a revision and giving you the big picture view of this topic's relationship. Because why I chose this topic is because they are kind of new, and most of the mid-year, Sec 4 mid-year topics will have included them. I know some schools haven't started molecular genetics and inheritance, right? So I chose not to include those. But these topics, I'm pretty sure almost all Sec 4s would have this topic in their mid-year topics. Yep. Okay. So a bit of introduction about myself. My name is Xing Wei. I'm the overmarked O-level biology tutor. We also have like lower sec and A-level biology tutor. So it's an important distinction. I went to TKGS for my secondary school, Tanjong Katong Girls School, you know, the green color uniform. And then after O-level, I went to RI. And then after RI, I went to NUS. I studied life science and psychology. I did my double major in NUS. So if you are, basically life science is bio lah. So I did do bio my whole life as a student. And I also did psychology. Don't annotate because it's very distracting for me. Yeah, sorry. Please don't do the annotate thing. I don't know how to switch that off. And then yeah, I also did psychology just for fun because I think it's interesting. Yeah, so I did that as my second major. I've been tutoring for 7 years. Since I finished my A-level, since I completed my A-level, I have been tutoring. Yeah. How do I switch the annotation off? I don't know how to switch off the annotation off, but don't do the annotation anymore and disrupt my lesson. Okay. Yes, so I also conduct group tuition and crash courses. Okay, more about that later. Oops. Okay, stay till the end. Just now I mentioned already, stay till the end because there's a giveaway. It will be a Kahoot quiz that is about the content that I covered today, but the details. So right, if you already kind of studied, but they're very simple lah, so it's not so bad. Yeah. Then one person can win these curated notes. If you already have them, maybe you can win it and give it to your friends. Okay, so how do we prepare for mid-year? I feel like this is a bit late coming from me right now because as I mentioned, some of the school mid-year is like next week. And then or in 2 weeks time. I think mainly in 2 weeks time. Most of my students have it in the first week of May. So maybe it's a bit too late, but if you still don't know this, I think this is the best time to hear it. So I have 3 revision tips for you. The first one is to look at the learning outcome. Everything you must know, like minimally everything you must know, live in the syllabus document. So let me show you guys what is the syllabus document. So for the okay, so for combined science, it is, you just go and search like bio SEAD syllabus on Google, right? It is definitely your first document that will come out, or you can search your syllabus code. This is your learning outcome. They tell you minimally, like, you know, candidates should be able to, and then everything here. So if you look at this list of learning outcome, right, all these list of learning outcome, and you can't answer what the learning outcome is asking you, like state the function of hepatic portal vein. or like state the equation in words only for photosynthesis. If you're not able to answer that question, then you don't know your content. So this is your really very first check mark that you can use when you are when you're revising, right? It should tell you that like, oh, okay, there's something that I don't know, or it should tell you that I'm able to answer this whole question, therefore I am kind of ready for this topic. Yeah. So I think this document, the pure bio one also has. And this is also how as tutor we know that what is tested for pure bio, what is not tested for combined bio. Yeah, so because the difference in learning outcomes. So of course, being in pure bio, your learning outcome is a lot more, not just like 3 more chapters, but within certain chapter, there can be a longer learning outcome. Yeah. Some learning outcome actually is amazing because it tells you exactly what you need to know. For example, I'm going to try. Not this one, not this one. Like for example, define homeostasis as the maintenance of constant internet environment. It basically tells you what is the answer of the question define homeostasis, right? So this document is amazing. You should be using it to check for your understanding. Of course, as I mentioned in the slide, it's like minimally what you need to know because it's not that they can only ask you like question that is here. They can ask you application question, and of course that is where you use your content and then you must apply it, right? But minimally, if you can answer all the questions in this syllabus document, it means that you know your content and you at least get the content part right. Okay, so this is the first tip. If you feel like, oh, okay, I finished studying already, I know everything already, make sure you go and test it one time. Do you already know everything? Okay, go and look at the learning outcome, try to answer what the learning outcomes are. The next tip is, we always say practice makes perfect, but I don't really believe in that. There is no perfection. I don't think I can answer every single thing yet, but maybe like a bit of higher success rate because I've been teaching so long and I also like do many practice paper with my students before, right? But I think practice does make mastery because I always tell my students, the content are always the same. Like they can't test you something that you haven't learned before. So therefore, even if a question is super tricky, like a question is like application question that you have never seen before, they give you like some enzymes that you have never seen before, or they give you some disease that you have never seen before, fine, that is a challenging question, right? But if you know your content, they can only test that area. So even if the perspective of the question is very tricky, you must remember and you must believe that you know the answer, just that you have to kind of link to them. Yeah, I always tell my students that, and my students will be like, they don't really believe because sometimes application question is just very hard. But trust me, as you do more practice, especially for mid-year, mid-year and prelims, right? Because it's school-based one, and then school love testing like harder. I'm sure all of you know lah. School papers are always harder than O-level. Why? Because they want to over prepare you, right? They don't want you to be complacent. They don't want you to just think that you are good enough and you stop studying, right? They want to over prepare you. That's fair. And that is when a lot of school will test like application question. In another word, basically they test the same content. They're definitely testing the same content. No point they test something that you don't need to know or you haven't at all learned before, right? They're testing the same content, but in a very tricky perspective. The question is asked in a very different way. The question is phrased in a very different way. You must know that you know the answer, you know the content. Yeah. So with practice, do a lot of practice paper. Right now, like my tuition kids, right? Really, we just like every week spend one full paper just because practice under time condition without referring, right? You will eventually you'll definitely get the hang of it. Like, oh, this question is asking for this topic. immediately you can identify that this is what topic, and then what are the keywords for this topic. And the practices give you a very very sharp kind of senses when you're doing question. But the prerequisite is you must know your content. If you don't know your content, there's no point practicing, because if you are trying, you're doing question, right? But you don't know the content, so most of the time you are not even fully answering the question, because you don't fully understand the question. You can't even link to like, oh, what exactly are the keywords. I think that is when practicing is really not helpful in this case. I would rather you go and revise your content. That is the most important. That is like your first step, number one step. Without first step, you can't go into the second step, which is practicing. And I think for practicing, there's also a lot of things, a lot of resources. Like I'm sure your school will give you some paper, and then don't forget your topical TYS. If you haven't done your topical TYS, I think that's a great place to start. Because as I mentioned, TYS O-level is usually not as difficult as your school paper. Some schools really went all out to kill their students during mid-year and prelim, and they have really a lot of application questions. But I think if you are able to do topical TYS without referring, that is a really great start as well, because topical TYS is more like more aligned to the learning outcome. Yeah. So make sure you do your topical TYS. After you finish already, you can do some of the school paper, practice paper. Yeah. And then last tip is that you need to learn from your mistake. There are some content that some students, like some chapters, I remember when I was a student, I hated all the plants chapter. And therefore, because of that, my weakness came from the plant chapter, because I don't like it, right? Then I don't really want to like go deep into it, right? So because of that, my weakness is there. And every time when I answer plants question, like for example 6 mark, I will get only like 3 mark, because I don't have the complete phrasing. Like there should be 6 points, but I only bother to remember 3 points. So that is my weakness. If I know that, I should be focusing on that and then learning from the mistake. Okay, so this brings me to like my favorite tip, and I think if you know this tip, I think it can help a lot, especially if you have trouble with memorizing. If you don't have trouble with memorizing, right, I think maybe this tip wouldn't help as much. But if you have trouble memorizing, this tip is amazing, because I think before memorizing the content, you need to know how many things you are trying to memorize. I'm going to give you an example. Wait, okay, yeah, I'm going to give you an example. So for example, okay, for example, adaptation of, okay, today we're not going through respiration, right? But I'm just thinking of example. What is the adaptation of lung or adaptation of alveoli to its function? Like how does it help with gaseous exchange? So you need to, so if the question asks you this, right? How many points are you supposed to know? So if you can tell me like, okay, 1 or 2 example, I think that is great. But how many, what is the full list? The full list is 4 points, right? So when you're revising, right, it's not enough. Like let's say when you're doing question, the question say ask you to list down 2 features of the adaptation. Okay, you are able to answer that two features. Okay, great. But what is the full list? The full list is 4 points. Are you able to give me all 4 points? I think this is part of revision that you should take note of as well. You need to know that there are 4 points. So when you're revising, you need to be able to list down all 4 points. If you're only able to list down 3, that's not good enough. You are missing 1. And if exam tests that last 1, then you'll lose mark. Or maybe if the exam asks for 4 points and you only can give 3, and then the 1 mark is missing. And that accumulates for every single question. Like maybe you never fully maximize all the points that you need to know, then that can accumulate. Yeah. So I think this is the tip that I will share with everyone. Knowing how many points you need to know. There are some that are more obvious. Like for example, the function of insulin, those kind of function of something, or basically it's a list kind, right? Those are very obvious that you need to know how many, and you should know how many. But there are some that are like, for example, fertilization has 8 points. Effect of adrenaline got 10 points, that kind of thing. And I think knowing how many points you need to know will help you in your revision process, because you will know if you haven't remembered everything. If you haven't remembered everything and you get tested that, then you'll miss out the mark. Yeah, so that is something that you can do as well when you are doing your revision. Okay, yeah, so let's look at the content now. Okay, as I said, this is not like, I'm not going to go in like details. Details is like up to you. But I will discuss a big picture. Okay, so start with so the first is coordination in human, right? So coordination in human, if you look at your syllabus, there's 3 chapters. It is nervous system, eyes, and hormones. And these 3 chapters are also chapters that are basically the same for both the pure and combined students, right? So these 3 chapters are definitely very important. And what is the golden rule for nervous system that I tell my students that you must remember? The golden rule that you must remember is really this arrow. It always starts with a stimulus. And then what is stimulus? Stimulus are changes in environment. So suddenly the change in light intensity, or suddenly there is a bug that is like flying around you, or suddenly you feel very cold, suddenly you feel very hot. All these are stimulus, changes in environment. And then receptor sense the stimulus. And then sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron. These 3 neurons are where the nervous system come into play. What is sensory neuron? What is relay neuron? What is motor neuron? This is actually the function of these 3 neurons are also part of your syllabus. Like specifically it says like state the role or explain the role. I can't remember what exactly is the wording, but basically explain the function of sensory neuron, relay neuron, and motor neuron. So you should be able to, I think there will be 1 mark, so you should be able to answer that as well. So what is the function of sensory neuron? It receives signal from the receptor, and then it sends it to the relay neuron or the central nervous system. And then relay neuron transmit nerve impulses from sensory neuron to motor neuron, and then motor neuron receive nerve impulses from relay neuron and then transmit it to the effector. So these are the nervous system part, right? The focus of nervous system. And then the last part is the effector. For effector, it is whatever muscle that will be working on, that will bring out and respond. So for example, if it is like getting pricked by a needle, then the effector is the muscle that will bring about a response. So it will be a bicep muscle or hand muscle. You don't have to be super specific here. Yeah. Okay, so the effector, because the effector need to bring about a change, it is always something, it's always a muscle, because muscle can contract and relax. Okay, so this is your golden rule for nervous system. And let's say if the question asks you to describe how nervous system respond to a certain changes or certain stimulus, this is when these are all your keywords. So what is the identifying what is the stimulus, saying that the receptor sense the change, then talk about sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron, and then it sends signal to the effector. So this case, the effector will change also, depends on what kind of stimulus it is, and then the response. So basically all these will change except for the middle 3. The middle 3 wouldn't change. Okay, so let's give you an example here. The most basic example is that if someone is pricked by the pin, so you can see that the stimulus here is pricked by a needle. Okay, I cannot draw straight line, lost. Stimulus pricked by a needle, and then the receptor in the skin can detect it. So here it is the pain receptor or the pressure receptor. Usually we don't need to go so detailed. Receptor is good enough. And then after that, nerve impulses generated by sensory neuron and then transmitted to the relay neuron and then to the motor neuron. So this part is aligned with the neurons part. So you realize that so it doesn't matter whatever stimulus they give you, right? you know, application questions, so they can give you really, really weird stimulus. Or not say weird, don't use weird. Stimulus that you've never heard before. I think I've seen a question is about when a fetus in the mother's womb, it will move when they hear loud sounds. Why? This is gonna be the same thing. Basically there's a stimulus, there's a receptor, and then there will be sensory relay motor effector response. All these always the same. So even if you see super weird question, right, just stick to the keywords. I think today your biggest takeaway will be keywords. Okay, must get the keywords right. Okay. Okay, continue. After we talk about these 3 neurons, and then it is the effector. So effector here is the hand muscle, and then we talk about the response itself, which is that the hand will withdraw, right? So this is a very complete answer, a very complete part for nervous system. And I think it really depends. Today, I think I talk a lot. Today, I will be talking a lot about like a complete answer, a very complete process for bio, because you realize that a lot of things you're learning is processes, and seeing the full picture, having the step 1 to step 10, the full process, helps you to understand the whole process. But a lot of time, the exam question may not be testing the full process. So this is when bio is not just about memorize and then regurgitate. If the question is just 2 mark, ask you on a very specific part, maybe like just this part, or maybe just this part, like receptor to relay, or sensory to motor, only this part, then you don't need all these things. So it really depends on the question, and that is when it tests you about reading the question and then understanding what the questions requires of you. I think that will come a lot from practicing. It's not something that I can exactly cover here. Yeah, but as you practice, I'm sure like you will slowly understand what the question is asking for. And maybe the question is not asking for all 5 marks, but only asking for 1 or 2 from there. This is when it's up to you to identify which point is asking. But it's also your responsibility to memorize this whole process, so that when they ask a question that is only asking for specific point, you're able to deliver. Okay. So this is for nervous system. And moving on with a chapter that is really, really linked to nervous system, and I would say they are, if I'm a marker, I would totally want to test them together. I'm sure you have seen questions, because I think eyes in WA already have, right? So I'm sure like in WA, maybe you have seen some of this relationship. For this is a reflex action like arc, right? And the one other than the pricking by needles or touching a hot pan, another reflex action that you learn about eyes is accommodation and pupil reflex, right? So they are also reflex action. You realize that you never have to tell your eyes, like tell your pupil that, okay, become smaller now because it's very bright, or become bigger now because it's very dark. Don't need, right? It's what your body will react naturally. Same for accommodation. Of course, this one you can control. If you realize that one of the eyes exercise is that basically controlling your focusing of object, but it is also like a reflex action because it naturally happens. So here, it doesn't change lah, okay? Sensory relay motor neuron. We don't change these words. It's gonna always be there. But the stimulus, receptor, effector, and response will change depending on the situation. So here, for accommodation, okay, I realize at least some of my students don't understand accommodation because maybe it's not being used. It's basically the focusing on different distance. That's called accommodation. Yeah, so the stimulus is that it is a changing of distance of object. And then the receptor in this case is photoreceptors at the retina layer. Yeah, so here the photoreceptors, this is, photo means light. So this is a specific name given to the receptors at the eyes. And retina is the layer where all the photoreceptors are at. Okay. This one has to do with like the structure of the eyes that you should also be familiar with, especially for pure bio students. Yeah, the structure of eyes is in your syllabus document. And then the effector is ciliary muscle. Okay, here is the part where I want to distinguish, right? Because ciliary muscle, suspensory ligament, and the lens. These three are always together. You can't possibly talk about one without saying the other two because they work together. But the effector here is the ciliary muscle because the lens and the suspensory ligament cannot give a response. They all changes based on the ciliary muscle. So the effector is only one, which is ciliary muscle. And you'll realize that I think a generic rule is that all effectors are muscles because they can contract and relax. Okay? So don't say it is suspensory ligament or lens. Okay, it's not. Then for pupil reflex, the stimulus is, okay, for the response part, is missing here, right? The response part, because the response part is up to you to go and memorize what happens. So when does it contract? And then when does it become taut? Or when does it slacken? And then what happens to the lens? Does it become more thicker or thinner, the focal length and things like that? I'm not going to cover here either. Even if you didn't buy the curated notes, there's a lot of free notes. If you buy the curated notes, it's definitely on the curated notes. If not, you can also go at Overmark website to see the free notes that we just uploaded. Not just website. I think I recently sent everything out on the telechat. Yeah, so that is your options. And of course, your textbook and your school notes. Yeah, so the response part, not covered today. But know that those are the response. So the response is that the ciliary muscle will either contract or relax, and then trigger a series of events for the suspensory ligament and lens. And you must talk about these two, right? You cannot skip it. You can't possibly skip it. Three of them are a package. So this is another idea that I like to use. It's called a package. Some keywords are always together. If you miss out one, you don't get the mark. Yeah, so for this case, it depends on the mark allocation. So maybe it's 3 marks. So okay, they can give mark to ciliary muscle, suspensory ligament, and lenses. So it really depends, but it's good to be disciplined and be always associate them together. I think that is a safer bet. Yeah. Okay, so response part not included today. Let's focus on stimulus, receptor, and effector. Okay, so light intensity. For pupil reflex, the light intensity, because it's either about too bright or too dark. And then for same thing, receptor is always the photoreceptors at retina. And then the effector here is, you can answer yourself, is the iris, radial, and circular muscle. So even though it's called pupil reflex, the effector is not pupil, because pupil refers to the whole. It doesn't change itself. It changes based on the radial and circular muscles. Again, it's the muscle in the iris. Okay, so if the question asks you what is the effector, or like when you are calling out the effector in your like essay questions or like maybe 3-4 mark question, make sure to refer to radial and circular muscle in the iris. Okay, so I guess the effector is my biggest point that I realized that sometimes it's not clear to students. Stimulus and receptor should be fine. Yeah, I think this part students usually get it right. Okay, so the next part is about when do you answer just about eyes and when do you add in the content from nervous system? Because I mentioned that eyes and nervous system are always tested together, but it's not always the case. All right, this part, let's say for example using pupil reflex as an example, right? This is taken from the curated notes. I just copy pasted. This is the nervous system part, right? You see this one in you are familiar with this. You realize that it's the nervous system rule that I talk about, all the keywords here. And then here is the responses in eyes. Okay, so it's kind of like the response in eyes. When do you talk about all together? When do you combine all together? And when do you just talk about the eyes is enough? Like this part is enough. I don't have a specific guide to you because my answer will always be like, you must look at the question, right? You must look at the question. But I think some of the hint is that, of course, it's the mark allocation. right, you realize that there's 3 marks here, 3 points here. If the question is 3 points, asking you how will the eyes react, I think that is clear. I think this is this case, right? But if the question asks you, oh, with reference to nervous system, or like with your knowledge about nervous system and the eyes, what happens when light is suddenly switched off, light is suddenly switched on, things like that. Okay, so and then those questions, right, if they expect you to talk about stimulus, receptor, sensory relay motor neuron, effector response, they can't just give you 2-3 marks, right? They must at least maybe 4-5 marks. So I think mark allocation is one clue, and how they ask the question is also a clue. Yeah. So that is my guide. Yeah. So when you are reading the question, just make sure like you read a few times and then make sure like try to understand what the question is asking for. So if you see like nervous system or even like reflex action, so if it says like explain pupil reflex or changes in pupil size based on like the reflex action, that is also, so the keyword is like nervous system, reflex action, all this kind of thing. And if the mark allocation is 5-6 marks, I'm sure you do have to correspond, you do have to include the points from here. Okay. Okay, I will try to answer the question later on the chat, but there's one like are the points on the curated notes the complete answer? Yes, all you need to know about the topic is in the curated notes and it's listed in points and keywords. But again, I want to stress that we need to see the question. The question may require you to combine a few things together. The question may require you to only pick out of these 5 points, maybe 1 point, that kind of thing. Yeah, so that has to do with like using the content and answering questions. I do not want to give you the false impression that, oh, as long as I memorize everything and I regurgitate everything, I can score my A. We really have to read the question and then identify what the questions want, and then use what we know, write it down. Yeah. For the other question on the chat, I'll try to answer later. Okay. Okay, so now we see the link between nervous system and eyes. The next part is the hormones. So for hormones, actually personally, I always link hormones to homeostasis. Because for the combined students, I know homeostasis is not in your syllabus, but later I will touch on a little bit about homeostasis. But the idea is that I think the processes of, okay, of course, hormones, in terms of the syllabus wise, there's a lot more other points. You need to be able to explain endocrine gland, diabetes, and things like that, right? But let's just talk about the insulin part, and then the action of insulin. Why I specifically bring out this part is because it's also a process. It's also a very clear process. The question can ask you to explain like what happens when blood glucose concentration increases beyond normal, or they show you a graph. Super common. Show you a graph, ask you a data question, and then ask you to explain. Right. Today I didn't really talk about data question, but data question, remember to quote figures, quote data. Just be super intentional in quoting your figure. From when x-axis increase from like A to B, y-axis increase from X to Y. Yeah, so just quote the figure like they cannot read the numbers. Just make sure you plot it out, show it off that you know the numbers and you know that you need to quote the figures, right? So let's give an example of like, okay, they show you like the blood glucose increase and then it come down. Then they ask you to do some data question. Okay, that's over, and then they ask you to explain, right? So when this kind of question, like it's like it should be like 3 mark like that, because basically it's the whole process, right? So this is when you should answer all these things. Like you should be able to give the marker what they want, and because this is all in the notes, like you should know what to answer. Okay, so when blood glucose level increases beyond normal, more insulin is released by a lot of Langerhans, and then So, okay, let's highlight all the keywords. So increases beyond normal. Okay, it's not good enough to just say increases, right? This is what I mean by a package. You can't just say increase. Yes, it increased, but it's increased beyond the normal. So there's a small range there. If it increase beyond the normal, then more insulin will be released. Insulin, islet of Langerhans, pancreas. And then it is directly transported into blood, right? And then what does insulin do? The function of insulin. So here, there are 3 functions of insulin. So I think there are questions where they just ask what's the function of insulin. Then you don't write about all this. If the question is asking you what's the function of insulin, right? It's not, you need to remember the whole process, but depending on the question, you only talk about one part. Okay, blood transport insulin. Then after that, what is the function of insulin? Increase permeability of cell membrane to glucose, so increasing glucose uptake. So what the insulin does is that it adds more. Okay, so this is when like you need to link to like some chapters, like very remotely, cell membrane are partially permeable. You only allow certain substances to pass through, and glucose is not one of them. So because if glucose want to pass through, it has to pass through certain channel proteins, right? To pass through, it needs to go through those kind of like special gates. And what insulin does is that it will increase this number of gates, so therefore more glucose can be taken in by the cell. Okay, so that's what it means by permeability. More glucose can be taken in. So when more glucose taken in, so all the glucose will go to the cells. Then the blood glucose level, of course, will decrease. So now what we are concerned of is the blood glucose. It's not the total glucose, right? And then it also stimulates the liver and muscle cell to convert excess glucose. This one is also another reminder. Excess glucose to glycogen. These are keywords that Naka will look out for. Not just convert glucose to glycogen, but excess glucose to glycogen. Yeah, so all this detail, right? Devil is in the details. Maybe it is not naturally known. Like, I think it's fair. It's not something that, oh, it's common sense. It's not, maybe it's not. I think keywords are not exactly like, some keywords are like, yeah, of course it's keywords, but then some are like in the detail, right? This is when you do more practices, then you will know this kind of thing, or you have to get it wrong once. Like, I remember, I think one of my students got this wrong. Like, it mixed out excess, it mixed out beyond the norm. So these 2 words are like the kind that maybe students will miss out. And because of that, like supposedly a very simple question, didn't get 2 marks. And then I believe that she will remember until she take O-level that these are the keywords. Yeah. And then it also increases tissue respiration. Insulin also increases tissue respiration because respiration process require glucose. Yeah. So all this, it lowers the blood glucose level, so it comes back to normal, right? So you realize that this is the whole process, and don't miss out the keywords part. I think the next one I'm going to talk about homeostasis. That's where I'll come back a little bit more about the blood glucose concentration process. Okay. One of the students asked about, can I elaborate more on the points for adrenaline and fertilization? I think those are in the notes, in your school notes, in your textbook. I won't talk about the details, but I think adrenaline is one of the example that why you need to know that you need to know 10 points, and then you have to make sure you know all 10 of them, right? So I think it's very easy to be like, oh, because there are 10 points, right? As long as I can list a few, I should be safe. Yes, I guess you are like largely safe if you can list a few, but there are some that are very specific. Okay, let's go through this one. What I always tell my students, how do you memorize the effect of adrenaline? Because there's so many of them, right? Is you just try to remember. Okay, firstly, of course, you need to know that there are 10 points. And then all these points, just think of it as like you are running away from a tiger. Because adrenaline is fight or flight, right? So it's either you fight a tiger or you like flee away from a tiger if you see a tiger, right? So the first one, when you're running but between running away from a tiger and then fighting a tiger, I will choose to run away. So okay, let's say I'm running away from a tiger. What do I need? I'm running, right? So I need energy. So I need glucose, I need oxygen. Okay, so see all this, like look at all these points. It stimulates liver to increase conversion of glycogen to glucose. Okay, so that hits the glucose part. And then increase glucose release into the blood by liver cells. So after they convert, they release it into the bloodstream. Of course, it needs to release into the bloodstream. Sorry, because if they don't release it into the bloodstream, then we can't use it for all the muscle cells cannot use it for aerobic respiration. Increased metabolic rate also causing more energy to be released during respiration. And then heart rate and blood pressure, it increased the oxygen and glucose supply. So because increasing in heart rate is when heart beat faster. Heart beat faster means that every pump, they pump the blood faster to every part of the body, right? So blood pressure also means that the blood travel faster. So because of that, the blood is where the oxygen and glucose is, and then it can supply it to the muscle cells. Remember that I'm running away from the tiger, right? So all this is like glucose and oxygen. This is supplying glucose, and then this is both the glucose and O2. And then next is dilated bronchiole. Your bronchiole is the breathing tube, right? Nose, trachea, and then bronchiole. Dilated bronchiole meaning that increase in breath, so more air can pass through, increase breathing rate and depth. So rate means the speed, and then that means the how much you are breathing in and out. So that allow more oxygen to be taken in, or it allows more CO2 to be pumped out, right? So oxygen, O2. So you realize that the first 5 points all have to do with glucose and oxygen. So if that helps, you can link it like that, right? So you need it for glucose and oxygen to produce energy because you're running away from a tiger. Okay, the 6th point, increased rate of blood clotting. Let's say accidentally during the process of running away, you I fall down. Then fall down, then you abrasion and everything. So in case or like somehow just the tiger caught up with my speed, which is totally not surprising if it happens, then there will be some blood loss, right? So increasing the rate of blood clotting, that can help to prevent excessive blood loss. Yeah, so that is why it increased the rate of blood clotting. But let me give you another perspective. So adrenaline is also released when you're a bit stressed, right? Like basically when you feel like you're met with danger. In real life, like right now, in our civilized society, running away a tiger is probably not a problem anymore. But let's say just feel like just stress. I think adrenaline is also released. That is when that's why it's not very good, because that increase the rate of blood clotting. And from your transport in human, you should know that blood clot can cause a lot of issues. One of it is coronary heart disease. Yeah, so increasing the rate of blood clotting, of course it has its evolutionary reason, but it may not be good like if you are always feeling stressed. Okay, so that is why we need to increase rate of blood clotting, prevent excessive loss of blood. And then constrict arterioles to the digestive system, constrict arterioles in the skin. Really cannot draw a straight line. But in general, arterioles is artery, arterioles, capillaries, right? So if you constrict arterioles, means that less blood from the artery can move to the arterioles and then the capillaries. So where it will go is that it will channel back to the important organs, heart, brain, skeletal muscle. Because the blood doesn't flow into the capillaries, it will flow back to some other places, and mainly the vital organs that control our survival, heart, brain, and muscle. So you realize that when you're nervous, you don't feel like eating. Like you just don't have very good appetite. Some people have that, or the digestion just doesn't flow as well. Yeah, so that is one of the reasons it constricts the arterioles. The blood doesn't flow through the digestive system. There is not that no blood at all, but less blood flow through the digestive system. Another one is it constricts the arterioles in the skin, right? Actually, constricting arterioles in the skin should sound very familiar to the pure bio students, because in the homeostasis chapter, we learn about temperature regulation, and we also learn about structure of the skin, right? When do we constrict arterioles? When we are cold, and then we channel blood back to the important organs. Yeah, so the adrenaline has the same effect for this, right? So constricting arterioles. So it will cause paleness. This is why when some people are nervous, you know, like the lips very pale, the whole face very pale. That is also one of the reasons. And then the next one is that pupil will dilate. Of course, you want to like pupil dilate, enhance vision. Because you're running away from a freaking tiger, you need to have like the clearest vision, know where to run away. And if the tiger attacks you. Okay, so there's another one. And here, you can anticipate certain questions like that, right? If they ask you adrenaline release, and then what happens to the eyes? If let's say you are able to list me like the first 5 points, like you're like, okay, I can remember 5 points from adrenaline. I think it's enough. It's not enough, because if they ask you what happens to the eyes, you need to tell me that the pupil will dilate. And then maybe they ask you what happens, and then they ask you for 4 marks. Then you need to go back to like just now that whole chapter to talk about like this whole process, right? That the radial muscle of the iris contract, circular muscle of the iris relax. These are the link that can be made. How the constriction of arterioles can help. One question is, how does the constriction of arterioles help with this process? Because more blood supply goes to the important organ, and blood supplies means oxygen and glucose. Yeah. Okay, and then the last one is contracted hair erector muscle. For human, it's useless because goosebump doesn't help us in any way. But for animals, it helps because especially those with feather, like birds or chicken, when they contract their hair erector muscle, their feather will stand and they'll look bigger size. And then they will look more scary if they are, depends, if they are fighting their own kind. Bigger size usually means like scarier. Yeah, so I guess in some way evolutionary it does help also. Yep, so these are the 10 effects of adrenaline. Realize that there are some that really things that are very related, like blood clotting, pupils, arterioles in skin. All these are kind of related to your other chapters. They may be very remotely linked, but there's nothing stopping the school or your teacher to test it like that. Yeah, so there's another question that just now asked me, do you have any tips on how to memorize bio notes and put it into long-term memory? And I think this is a great question because, you have, for combined students, you have 16 chapters. Is it 16? 16, I think 15 or 16. And then pure bio students have 19 chapters. And that's a lot of content. If you are really purely memorizing, right, and then just like I just memorized without understanding it, it's gonna be lost for sure. I think when I was talking to Daryl, like one of our podcasts, I was saying how like some students retain, my own students, some students retain their Sec 3 topics really well. Like they still remember bulk of it, or maybe details not so much. So maybe like 70 to 80% from Sec 3, right? They could remember them. And then some details not really. But then some students really return 100% of their Sec 3 topics. What is the difference here? I think this has to do with what this student asked about long-term memory. And it really has to do with understanding. If you truly understood a topic, I think you should be able to retain a minimally like maybe half of the content. So I think what differs these students from like how much they retain from Sec 3 is really the understanding part. Because if you are really purely memorizing, right, like you are just memorizing like the words, but you haven't really internalized the idea or even think of ways to like, oh, what is the real life scenario? Like just now I spent so much time talking about the effect of adrenaline because I hope it sticks with you. some of my students say that it found it useful. Like think of the scenario that when is adrenaline released, and therefore what kind of response our body need to help us counter with the process. So running away with a tiger is like the one that I can think of. So for long-term memory, everything that I just talked about, or like all you're trying to memorize for, imagine if you're trying to memorize, you try to cram all the memory for mid-year. Some school is quite xiong. They test every single chapter, including the last chapter. So I think it's the first time you will feel like, oh, there's really a lot of chapters, because the previous test and WA, it wouldn't be so many, right? Mid-year is probably the first exam that really has like a ton of chapters. Imagine you try to cram everything in, then you do okay, decent for mid-year, but it's because you just purely memorize. You're gonna return everything before O level, and then you have to repeat the process for O level, and times like at least like what 8, 9, 10 chapters. Not really, sorry, 8, 9, 10 subjects. It's not gonna be possible. It's really not gonna be possible. Like maybe it's possible, but it's gonna be really painful. And it depends. Like if I believe that if you want that A1, you need to understand and you need to really internalize the content. I think bio is really, like, a lot of people say bio is all about memorizing, but I think for bio students who did it, who do all the exam before, y'all would know that it's really not just about that. If you only purely memorize and regurgitate, maybe you can pass, maybe you can at least get a little bit, but it wouldn't be an A1 for sure. And if you are aiming for A1, and I hope that all of you are at least trying to aim there, right? It shouldn't be that way. Yeah. So that's what I truly believe in. I think it's about really fully understanding the process. Fully understanding the process. Fully understanding what exactly happened. Oh, and you see how I'm trying to link a lot of topics together. Even it may not be the super obvious things to do. That's because I also believe that seeing the big picture, seeing all these links will help you to understand and internalize a lot of content as well. So I've been like spamming you a lot of like links to like other chapters. That is really a way that how you know that you fully understood and you could internalize them. Yeah, so this whole 20 chapters or 19 chapters, right? They are all interlinked, really, really all interlinked. There are some chapters that are more obvious, like all students see, they know that they are linked together. But a lot more than that, it is also linked. Yeah, so I always stress that to my students. And I think that can help with internalizing. Find your links, actually that's one of the points that I'm going to cover later. Yeah, but since the student asked, I think I will just talk about it now. You don't want to spend before your O level, right? You don't understand, but you're trying to cram these 10 points into your system. And then maybe perhaps you could forget the next day. Yeah. Okay, so that is you still have a lot of time. I want to assure all students, if you feel like your bio content is not good enough, I want to assure you that maybe mid-year, not so much, but O level, you still have time. You really still have time to go and understand every single thing from the start and then go and memorize them. Okay. But of course you have to work very hard. Yeah, if you actually never really understood, right? So I think you have to you will have to work very hard lah, but there is enough time. Like, trust me on that. Yeah, I'm sure like all our tutors will tell you the same thing. Okay, move on. Okay, now we talk about homeostasis. I'm not going to talk about the whole idea of homeostasis. I'm not going to talk about every single process in detail, but I just want to cover a little bit about, okay, what homeostasis is about in your homeostasis chapter. For the combined students, maybe you just look at the last column, okay? But for pure students, stimulus, receptor, control center, effector, response. This is like the nervous system, the homeostasis version of like the arrow thing, right? There's a stimulus, means a change in environment, a receptor that detects this change of environment, then it sends signals, be it through like nerve impulses or hormones, doesn't matter. It sends to the control center, effector, and then a response. Okay. So here, for each of these homeostasis, like things that we want to keep constant, body temperature, blood water potential, and blood glucose concentration, all these things are the factors that we want to keep constant. For what reason, you should be able to explain, but today I won't talk about it. You should go and find out yourself. But if you already know, that's good, right? These three factors, these three things. Okay, so for body temperature, the stimulus is either the body temperature increase or decrease beyond normal, right? So same idea, beyond normal, then it will trigger the homeostasis process. The receptor is thermoreceptor, but it's totally fine to just say receptor. Control center, hypothalamus, and the effector is the skin. The response is the reverse. Okay, so response part is the part where most of the memorization is going on here. What happens? How many points are there when body temperature increase beyond normal? Is it 4? I think it's 4. Yeah. So when body temperature increase beyond normal, there's 4 things you need to be able to tell me that the body will do to bring the temperature down. And when the body temperature decrease below normal, there is also 4 points that the skin will do to bring the temperature up. So this is the parts where I think most of the memorization is happening. And this one, you can look at the specific chapter for the point. Okay. Blood water potential, same thing, right? So it is also a hormone because it involves ADH. The stimulus is either increase or decrease, and then there's osmoreceptors. There's hypothalamus. The control center is also hypothalamus, and then the effector is the kidney tubules and the collecting duct, how permeable they are. So this is the responses. It's also up to you to go and memorize. When it's higher water potential, is it more ADH or less ADH, more permeable or less permeable, things like that. And then more water being reabsorbed and or not, things like that. Okay, so here, okay, the last part is the one that concerns, of course, all students, is the blood glucose concentration. Just now we talked about insulin and glucagon, but mainly insulin. You know that they probably test insulin more lah. Okay, so same thing, right? The stimulus either increase or decrease, and then the receptor is the islet of Langerhans. It detects the blood glucose level. And then control center is always hypothalamus. It's basically the central nervous system lah. It's the brain. Hypothalamus is the part of our brain. And then the effector is the liver or the muscle cell. And then the response is the reverse of the stimulus, right? So the homeostasis process, these are all homeostasis. And then when you are thinking of like the full thing to talk about, right? Like the full question to talk about, like full answer to write down, all these can go through your brain, right? So stimulus, receptor, control center, effector, response. If you're able to hit all this, you probably have a more complete answer. Okay. Yeah, so just now, yeah, so this is it. I think this slide should be before the slide just now. Yeah, so that this is homeostasis for the combined student. It's basically about balancing, bringing back the, like if it becomes imbalanced already, like either it increase or decrease below normal, then you have to bring it back. Yeah, homeostasis is like it has to be balanced. Yeah. Okay. Before I move on to the reproduction one, I don't have enough time. Before I move to reproduction, I want to answer some questions. Adrenaline released with glucagon to increase blood glucose level, or is adrenaline only released in fight or flight situation? Good question. They have the same effect, right? Adrenaline and glucagon have the same effect. Basically, it will bring up it will lead to an increase in body temperature. It will lead to an increase in blood glucose level. But adrenaline is only released during fight or flight situation. Yes. If it's like there's no like danger or anything, it's simply because like, maybe we eat too much and then blood glucose level go up. It's only glucagon. So they are released in very different situations. Yes. And then a bonus thing is that adrenaline will cause a much faster in blood glucose level increase compared to glucagon. Yeah. Because adrenaline has just think of like from the situation perspective, adrenaline has a much emergency kind of feeling. because usually it's like literally you immediately have to start either fighting or flying or fleeing. But for glucagon, it's not so much. Yeah. So in terms of speed wise, adrenaline can bring it about faster. Yeah. Good question. Okay. Let's move on to reproduction. Then we can talk about. Then we can do the Kahoot quiz. I have another class after this, so I have to end on time. Okay, reproduction. I don't know how people feel about reproduction in plants and reproduction in human. But reproduction in plants, it's not a super long chapter. It's actually pretty short in terms of content. But maybe just like me when I was a student, everyone hates plants. Okay, but I have one student who loves plants chapter. But it being a chapter, right, in terms of the content, right, it's actually pretty short. And I think it's very straightforward. Once you understand the whole idea. So today I'm trying to let you understand the whole idea, but I'm not here to delve into the details again. Okay, the idea of reproduction in plants, it starts with reproduction. In general, reproduction just means like the proper definition, please refer to your syllabus. I can't remember exactly, but basically it's about producing offspring, ensure the propagation of species, right? That is the definition of reproduction. Yeah, so as long as there's offspring, as long as the species can continue to propagate, that is reproduction. So this is when we start splitting up to a lot of different kinds, right? There is asexual reproduction. Why don't I want to let me? Asexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction is like copy and pasting. Really like, when you copy and paste, it's exactly the same. That is really sexual reproduction. So the example here is like potato, garlic, onion, this kind of thing. It's like really copy and paste. They are exactly the same. Everything is the same, including the number of chromosomes, including the genes, right? So the keyword is genetically identical offspring. And there are other keywords as well. Here, I will leave it to you to go and find out, okay? And then there is sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction will be the one that we are familiar with. Basically, it involves two parents, one mother and one father, male gametes and female gametes. So that is sexual reproduction, right? So that is something that is what happens in humans. So maybe, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But then in plants, this happens in plants, there is self-pollination and then cross-pollination, right? So you must identify that as long as there's pollination, it is already considered sexual reproduction. So in no way self-pollination and cross-pollination are the same or involved in asexual reproduction. Okay, because pollination, usually when we say pollen, we refer it as the male gamete. So as long as there is a pollination, which means the transfer of gametes, then it's definitely sexual reproduction. Because sexual reproduction is involved, the keyword is fusion of gametes. Okay, so this is when like all the keywords are very important. So self-pollination, the quickest idea in terms of like the content and everything, right? I really don't want to go into it. But the whole idea, self-pollination, next time when you are doing MCQ or anything, right? The best guide, self-pollination, if they're the same plant, basically one plant is self-pollination. Okay, so in this case, maybe the flowers have both the anther and stigma. So both the stamen and carpel. So they have bisexual flowers. Or within the same plant, it has male flower and female flower. So as long as the same plant, as long as only one plant is considered self-pollination. And then yes, cross-pollination is involved two plants, two different plants. Okay, so this is like your quickest idea in terms for understanding part. Okay, I realize that I probably cannot have those because the next part. For cross-pollination, because it involves two plants, right? And that two plants can be very far away. It can be like really, really super far away, not even in the same farm, same proximity. That's fine because it relies on external agent. Okay, the external agent is the insect and the wind. So there is, when we say insect pollination and wind pollination, usually we refer to cross-pollination. Not saying that within the same plant, the bees cannot visit within the same plant, but cross-pollination will rely a lot more on this external agent, aka insect and wind. Okay, so every time you see insect pollination or wind pollination, immediately link it to cross-pollination and then link it to sexual reproduction. So if I ask you, what kind of genetic variation is there found in, like in some way, like not like they will ask you so direct, but you know, in some way, if they ask you like about genetic variation in insect pollination, wind pollination, you know that it's cross-pollination, you know that it's sexual reproduction. So the amount of genetic variation is definitely high. Okay. And then of course, after pollination, what will happen? The definition of pollination, yes, as I said, it does, but mainly cross-pollination, but some self-pollination definitely involved insect and wind as well. So pollination, the definition of pollination is the transfer of pollen grain from one anther to one stigma, right? So depending on self and cross, you go and put is it the same flower or the same planting? Yeah, but the idea is that it transfer the pollen, which is the male gamete, from one anther to one stigma. So after pollination, what should happen? Pollination is only the transfer. This is when the fertilization process comes in. This is the part where there's about 8 points. But you know, the question don't always ask for 8 points. You have to, maybe the question asks for specifically certain kind. Yeah. So the whole process of fertilization, go and memorize. Yeah, go and memorize. So this is the big picture. Other than whatever is showing here, right? Another factor is the pro and cons, advantages and disadvantages. Advantages versus disadvantages. That is also sometimes tested, right? What is the advantages of asexual reproduction versus sexual reproduction, self-pollination versus cross-pollination? Yeah. So okay, so it's this another factor, the advantages part. So mainly whatever you need to know is something like that. And I hope that this slide just give you like the very big picture idea of like, oh, what happens in reproduction in plants. Yes, winner of Kahoot gets the notes after this reproduction in humans. Okay, for reproduction of humans even longer, and I'm not going into the details, but the big picture is, okay, what is the first, usually if you have the notes or if you have your school notes, the first part they will tell you is the male or female reproduction system. So you learn about the structure. You need to know about like testes, epididymis, sperm duct, and then all the glands, seminal vesicles, and then urethra, penis, right? All these list of things, it can be found in your syllabus document. You should be able to know their function, and you need to be able to label them. And then after the system, the system is the male gamete, which is sperm. So we have the haploid sperm. Haploid means half the number of chromosomes, number of chromosomes from normal cells. So haploid sperm. And then there is also the whole female reproductive system. Ovary, oviduct, uterus, cervix, vagina. Need to be able to label them, need to be able to give me the function of this different organ, and then the structure of egg. And then how do egg be released in the human female body is through ovulation. So there is the whole menstrual cycle that you should know. Right, so the different days that you should know. Of course, day 1 to day 4 is your menstruation, and then another important day is day 14, ovulation. Okay, so usually that 28 days. Okay, so after we learn about the male and female reproductive system, menstrual cycle, then the whole series of process. After we have the haploid sperm and haploid egg, what will happen to them? If the sexual intercourse happens during fertile period, there will be fertilization. Fertilization, it gives us the fertilized egg or zygote. This is only one cell, one single cell. All of us start with one single cell. And then there's a lot of cell division or mitosis. And then it gets embryo. Embryo is when it is about 32 cells. This is just for your information. How long is this process? Can test yourself, but it's about 5 days. 5 days is what it takes for the zygote to move from the site of fertilization, which is within the oviduct, very near to the ovary, and then move out to the uterus. Okay, so 32 cells. And then after embryo is implantation. It will implant itself into the uterus. Right. So all the details are you should go and find out as well, because this is actually quite a favorite topic. I think past 5 years they tested 3 times. It's quite a lot. Yeah. So they do like to test this, and especially like this part. So after implantation, the embryo implant into the uterine lining. What will happen is that it will grow into the fetus. Okay, so this is where it stops for the combined students, right? So combined students, you need to know this process and then all the details here. And then for the pure bio students, there's one more extra part, which is how do the fetus grow during the next like 9 months. There is a few things. Oh, okay, before that, if this is like during fertile period, right? Fertile period. If sexual intercourse happens during the infertile period, there's no fertilization, right? So the uterine lining breaks down. So this goes back to the menstrual cycle part. And then another factor here is the hormones. Progesterone level will fall to 0. This is also your menstrual cycle. You should know the level of progesterone and estrogen. But if there is fertilization, the progesterone level, I know cannot read. Progesterone level persists to maintain uterine lining. So there will be a high amount of progesterone level to maintain the thickness of uterine lining. Instead of repeat the menstrual cycle, right? The uterine lining will be thick throughout the 10 months pregnancy, 9-10 months pregnancy. Okay. So the level of hormones is also something to take note of. But it really depends on the question. If the question asks you to talk about hormones, then you talk about hormones. If not, it is not. Don't have to always refer to that. Okay, and then the last part is the part where just now I mentioned. This is the part where combined science students, not in the syllabus, but it's in the syllabus for the pure bio students. For the fetus, they need to grow, right? How do they grow? Because of placenta, umbilical cord, and amniotic fluid. There is 5-6 points for placenta, 2 points for umbilical cord, and 5 points for amniotic fluid. Can you list them all down? If you cannot, time to go and revise. Okay? Okay, so this is the full thing. In summary, I think this is what we covered. And I wanted to actually what I wanted today, why I chose it, curate it like that, is because I wanted to tell everyone that many things are linked together. And I think as Sec 4, it should be actually easier for you to study, because I don't teach Sec 3, but I think for last time when I used to teach Sec 3, right, I think sometimes it's very hard to explain because there are things that it will be covered like far down the future. But now you guys mostly already know most chapter, maybe except for the last one. I know most school haven't touched the last one yet, but that's fine because I think that's quite independent. Now you have all the information you need to link with each other. Of course, there's still missing pieces, maybe covered in A level, but that's fine. I think you already know a lot more than your Sec 3 self. And this is when you can link a lot of things together. And when you find the link, when you understand the link, I think this is when you really understood the whole syllabus. Yeah. And I think you'll realize that why syllabus is arranged like that. Yes. There's a question that asks, when do you think we should start revising, memorizing the content? I think it's now or like last year. Yeah. Always a good time to start memorizing the content, because practice makes mastery, right? Start now, if you can, whatever you can retain, you retain. Whatever you cannot, when the next time you revise, you retain more, and then the next time you revise, you retain more. Yeah, I think that is the key lah, right? It's like accumulation. Okay. Okay. Okay, the content shown are all from curated notes or crash course. Like if you choose to attend, if you choose to buy the curated notes or crash course, you'll get a lot more extra information. I'm gonna skip through this because we have time. And if you need more help and guidance, sign up for group tuition. For the pure bio, we have a weekly 2-hour group tuition. For the combined bio, it's 1.5 hours. And then crash course, there's 3-hour crash courses over June holiday. If you are interested, sign up for them because the dates are already out. You can block off your time. This is the date for bio group tuition. If you have a group of 3 and above, you can always start a class that isn't within this list. You can tally me for more information if you are interested. Okay. Crash courses. Okay, I want to focus on this because I think last year our crash course was 4 hours, cover all single content. I felt like I read through the 4 hours, like really non-stop. But today, based on the feedback of last year students, we structure it such that it's by module, and O-level has 3 modules. So it happens over 9 hours. And I promise that these 9 hours will be very meaningful. I think you will really get a very good recap, revision, and then understanding of the whole syllabus. I think that is when we will definitely include a last chapter in every single chapter in the syllabus. Yeah, so the dates are already out, not just for bio, for all other chapters. So if you feel like, oh, okay, I think I'm quite good in bio, but maybe I'm not very good in I don't know, chem, physics, math, then there are other chapters as well. There's a question about, is there another one closer to O's, or is this the only one? Very good question, but we don't know yet. Because it depends on like demand, it depends on our time, but as much as possible, we're definitely hoping to have another one before O's, like closer to O's. Yes, we will. That is the goal lah. Yeah, but cannot confirm yet. Yeah, but this one is confirmed. Where is it? Okay, what will happen there? We will recap key content. Definitely talk about commonly tested question. That's the favorite part, right? Like really drill into question and then how to answer the question. Common mistake, answering technique, super important. Today I didn't cover anything like that, but I want to stress how important answering technique is. Exam technique basically is in an exam, because it's after all an exam. If you have those techniques, you will probably do better. And if you sign up for this crash course, you will get the curated notes. If you already buy the curated notes, then it can minus off. So meaning that you minus $40 if you already own one. So we don't give you the copy of curated notes. The location is at Yishun. It is at Tzu Chi Humanistic Youth Center. We had our crash course there last year. Super nice place. I don't know, okay, depends on where you stay, but the venue itself is really very nice. And there, even like after the crash course, you can go and walk, right? That area is really very nice. Okay, but if you stay far away from Yishun, then hopefully like you wouldn't mind traveling down. Yeah. Okay, so this is the date. And these details are on the website, right? But if you want, you can like take a look. It's breaking down into 3 modules. Maybe there are some topics that you feel like you read through the first module, you are like, oh, I'm an expert in those topics. Then it's fine. You can choose to only attend the course for 1 module, or you can choose all 3 modules. So there is a bit of options here. Okay. Yeah, there's quite a bit of options here. These are the 3 dates for June holiday. It has to be Sunday. There are other crash courses are in weekday. There are some other subjects on weekday because I'm not free during weekday, so mine is on Sunday. I don't know that is like a good or bad thing, but yeah, no choice because of my schedule. Okay. Oh, there's combined science also, but for combined science, it is in 3 hours. So last year we had like 2 hours only. So this year 1 more hour. I think that's great. And you also get So you sign up for, or if you only want bio or you only want chem or only want physics, right? There's also option to just sign up for those. Yeah, so I think there's a lot more choice this time around. Okay, 5 more minutes left. Okay, let's do the Kahoot quiz, everyone. Thanks for staying until now. Oh my god, my Chrome, right, has been crashing non-stop. So I hope that it wouldn't crash mid-game. You know, I'll be so angry. I thought Chrome is the like reliable browser, but my Chrome keep crashing. Okay, join the Kahoot quiz, everyone. Even if you don't want the curated notes, right? I think the Kahoot quiz is quite fun because it is revision question, basically bio question. Yeah, so just take it as a revision before your actual one. Or the competition is gonna be stiff. There's like so many people. I give you all 1 minute. Okay, quite quickly, take out your phone. Do you think we're still expecting more people? Will you reach 100? Maybe when you reach 100, I start. Okay, I'm gonna start. Just 20 seconds very long, huh? Yay! Wow, that's quite a lot of people getting it wrong. But anyway, there's no points here. This is just a practice round. Yeah, this is just a practice round. Okay, but good job. Y'all know your syllabus code. That's very good.
Oh my god. Can you see stuff? Oh my god, time is out. I didn't even see anything.
Okay. Okay. The 6 people who put through, okay. But it's not like it's really a not. Okay. Well, this one is really fast finger. Okay, this is the real thing, real thing.
Hello? I cannot see shit.
Cannot see the screen. Other people can see. Okay, I'm gonna assume that everyone can see because most people can get the 2 questions and this question right. Yeah, if there's any technical difficulties, I apologize. Okay. Nice. It's retina. It's the photoreceptors in the retina layer. Okay, and the rest are other structures that are not the photoreceptors, not the receptor. There's a lot of changes in the ranking. See the picture. The pupil is very narrow and small. Let me show the media. It only happens when it is very bright. So that's why the pupil become very small. If it's very dark, the pupil should become very round and big so that it enlarge and then take in more light. Okay, this one, okay, maybe it's like nothing, don't know the cats, right? So it's fine. I think this is third last question. Yes, everything else is a function of is a function of insulin. So this one is not a function of insulin. Nice. Wow. Okay, see if Yushen can keep up the streak. The amount of genetic variation refers to so this is in your advantages and disadvantages. So for those who like didn't quite understand this, you have to go and check your the disadvantages versus advantages between cross and self and then asexual and sexual pollination. For cross pollination, because the gametes come from two parents plants, there is more variation. For self pollination, it's coming from one plant, but there is still fusion of gametes, so there is still variation. But for asexual reproduction, it's copy paste, exactly the same, genetically identical. There's no genetic variation at all. Yeah. So therefore the sequence here, from the highest amount of genetic variation to the lowest amount of genetic variation. Okay, last question. Also need to look at the media here. Show media. Ovulate on 2nd March. So this is 2nd March. Day 1 to 28, when do women ovulate is day 14. So meaning that 2nd March is day 14. So when will the next menstrual period begin? Is day 1, right? Or after day 28. So this is day 14. This is day 21. This is day 28. So 16 March is the end of a cycle. So therefore 17 will be the start of the next menstrual period. So basically the next day 1. Okay, so 17 is the next day 1. So here I think the learning thing is that if they give you this kind, right, it's more like identifying which day is it. So ovulation is day 14, so you just count. Yeah, so here the answer is the start is 17 March, so B. Okay, whoever win, right, the first, right, can you take a screenshot, like, and then telling me that you are the winner, like you are this person. But congrats to Kaixing and Tenzing. Yushen, okay, Yushen, please screenshot. Let me faster screenshot also. Yay! Congrats everyone, and congrats whoever is on the podium. I think y'all did great. Okay. That's the end of this. If you enjoy this revision, please sign up for the rest. I think other tutors will also deliver good content and help you with your revision. And then or leave us a kind Google review. Yes, all the best for media. Let me try to answer some of the questions. Practical tips, please refer to the chat. I think Daryl sent out a practical, like forwarded our messages from the past about practical. So just go and check the chat. Is picturing sound counted as memorizing, like for meiosis, mitosis, and fertilization? I think it is. if you are able to immediately, if you are able to draw out what happens in meiosis and mitosis, it's kind of a way of memorizing, but you still need to memorize the keywords lah. Like at least you memorize the process already, like you fully understood the process. That's why you're able to draw it out or picturing it. But the keywords are still the missing part that you must know about that you must know, like the keywords. Like now, around when should we have finished the syllabus? You mean your school must finish the syllabus or you must finish memorizing? I think it depends. If your school finish teaching, that's when you can start remembering and memorizing all the content already. Liver is the one that's converting glycogen and glucose. Yes. Adrenaline and insulin is the signal. Is a message, it's a messenger that tells liver to do it. Tips on memorizing in general. Understand it and then memorize the keywords. Don't memorize everything word for word. This doesn't really help. But once you understand, as long as you memorize the keywords, you should be able to write it out quite easily. And then there's a lot of processes. So if you can picture the processes, in bio, there's a lot of processes. So in general, if you can picture the processes, like what another student said, like can picture meiosis, mitosis, fertilization process, then it's kind of like, of course, and sorry, like tips of, I just answered the next question. Yeah, so back to the tips on memorizing in general. Once you can picture them, then you memorize the keywords, then it makes more link together. Is enzymes and nutrient linked? Yes, of course. Enzymes break down the nutrients. For the crash courses, this is a good question. For the crash courses, is it only physical or have like Zoom lessons also? We haven't ironed out the part, but for now, confirm is physical lesson. But if there's enough demand, but usually students will prefer physical lesson, right? But if there is enough demand for Zoom lesson, we are thinking of like combining like both a physical session and Zoom session, but I cannot confirm yet because we are not sure. So for now, what I can confirm is that there will be a physical lesson, but Zoom lesson, not sure. Yeah. What is the best study method in your opinion? This is a super generic question. Understand things, understand, and then understand, revise, practice. Yes, that works for, I think, all subjects. Yeah, so this question, how do you know what part of nervous system is damaged? If the question tell you, so this is when you need to know what is the function of nervous system, sensory neuron, relay neuron, and motor neuron. So if the question say the leg cannot move, but it can feel it, so meaning that it's the motor neuron that has issue. Yeah. High blood glucose or increases beyond the norm. It's best to write high blood glucose increase, blood glucose level increases beyond the norm. How do you link chapters together? You have to understand, and then there are just points where it will link up. Like you have to go and find the link. But there are some things where the links are there. Yeah. Or you can attend the crash course and I can spell out all the links for you. Yes. But even like the links that I find, right, is me. I think these are the links, but you may find other links. Practical tips, please refer to the chat. Yeah, there is a document sent for both bio and chemistry. When is it when you feel something touching, there's nothing touching? I don't get this question. If there's any specific question, you can send it to me, but I don't remember seeing this kind before. Yeah. A lot of definition questions in paper 2. Not really. I think at most 1 or 2. At most 1 or 2. Yeah. if you go and do your yearly DYS, you realize that maybe sometimes there's 1 or 2, but not a lot. Yeah. What do we do after you go to after the crash course? What do we do after you go through the content? The crash course will be arranged such that we will recap the concept and we'll try questions as well. Yeah. We'll try questions as well. And then we will also have like explanation, exam related techniques. Yeah, so it's kind of a combination of all. Yeah, so not just about going through content, but it definitely is part of the crash course. Yeah. Open to Telegram questions directed to me. It depends on what kind of question. If I can answer short in, like, if it's not a super big question, like explain this whole chapter to me. And if it's like very specific question that I can answer, definitely yes. I've answered specific questions. Common practical question tested in O-level. Study your food. Practical really just refer to the notes, but basically your food, your plants chapter. Yeah. Is there a deadline for the signing up of the crash course? Not really, until it's full. If it's full, then it will close. But if it's not, I think even if you sign up 1 day before, still, as long as there's still slot, then you can come. Yeah, because there is a maximum number the center can take. The tally you can go and refer to the chat. For tally you can refer to the overmark chat. Enzyme chapter. What is the question? Like, is it a common practical topic? Yes. Enzyme, food test, plants chapter. Because those they can easily test you. But for like human chapter, they cannot. They can't possibly give you like a view line, right? A bit difficult. But these are the common one. They can find creative way to test you other chapter. But mainly the most common one is the food, enzyme, plants, photosynthesis, transfer. Maybe even transpiration is a bit less. I think photosynthesis is quite common. Do they ask for voluntary actions? I don't know about your school, but O-level wouldn't. Yeah, but practical thing is on the chat. It's on the Telegram chat. If you search overmark O-level, you should be able to see it. Yeah, it's all in the chat. For chem and bio. Yep. Okay, I need to go because I have another class. Thank you everyone for attending and thank you for staying until the end. There's still 46 of you.